So today we are going to take a look at Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Before I get started, I want to say that the overall rating for this book, it's not as high as I feel like it should be. I just can't put my finger on a particular category I think should be higher, and I think its overall should be around a 6.5, but I just can't. I can't put my finger on why. Viktor Frankl has a very unique perspective in that he was a psychologist at the time he was imprisoned in the concentration camps during World War II. And so he offers a perspective of someone who was analyzing the situation of the camp as it unfolded. Um, and as it's very difficult to conduct a sort of experiment or analysis where you put someone in an extremely hopeless situation because doing that is extremely unethical. And so we don't have access to an abundance of data points, and so that's what makes Frankel's analysis so interesting. And he comes to a very profound sort of conclusion or kind of theme, I guess, throughout the book is that uh, not having meaning or refusing to have a source of meaning, or sorry, not having meaning or not allowing oneself to have a source of meaning or anything in that type of thing, that's not an option. Meaning is necessary, 100% necessary. Like you die before you lose meaning in terms of the way you should approach things, and so this adamant refusal to accept a lack of meaning in one's life, for Frankl, um, is what allows people to carry on in otherwise hopeless situations. Well, I mean, like, insofar as a situation can be hopeless, the inside of the concentration camps were hopeless. Like, it just doesn't get any worse. But his position was that you can still have meaning and thereby hope. Um, and so he talks about sources of meaning, and he gives roughly three. One is like meaningful relationships. He talks about how at one point when he was getting brutalized in the camp, he thought about his beloved, and that got him through it. The other is meaningful work. One of the things he talks about is how the desire to publish his book and include his experience in the concentration camp helped keep him strong. And the other one is meaningful suffering, which is a very interesting type of conclusion. He argues that we shouldn't try and seek out suffering, or that suffering isn't a good thing. But if you are going to suffer, you should suffer well. And it's kind of that's the type of conclusion you get when your paradigm is you absolutely positively must have some meaning in your life. And so what Frankl how you are able to have this type of meaning, Frankl argues that they can take everything from you. They can take your clothes, your possessions, to some extent your dignity, right? But the one thing they can't take from you is your ability to interpret the situation as you would like, and the ability to focus on the things you want to focus on. And so his prescription is you should focus on suffering well, and you should view suffering, at least if you're in a concentration camp, you should view suffering as an opportunity for meaning. And he actually uses that word in one spot, although I forget exactly where it was, where he calls it an opportunity. And this type of resiliency is very interesting psychologically, um, especially when juxtaposed with the learned helplessness types of studies done by Martin Seligman and the positive psychology branch of psychology, where like the paradigm study is one where a dog is put in a like a shuttle container of sorts, and there's one adjacent to it, and the dog is shocked, and so the dog will just jump over. And so what they do during the experiment is they keep the dog strapped down so the dog can't jump over. And what the dog eventually learns is that its actions are meaningless, and it gives up hope and it experiences helplessness. And even when they take the leash off and the dog can now jump over, it just sits down and whines. It's learned to be helpless. And so, what I think is interesting is the dog, because the dog's actions were divorced from its ability to escape its pain, it became helpless. If you take Frankl's paradigm, where you can control what you focus on, and that can never be taken away from you, and you can choose to focus on how things are meaningful, then you always have an action for your situation. So you might not be able to escape the camp, but you can focus on your suffering being meaningful, and therefore your actions are meaningful, and so you avoid helplessness. So that was an interesting thing that was not in the book that I was thinking about while I was reading the book. So let's get into the ratings a little bit. For utility, I gave it a 6. I think that for the most part, if you have a good life, maybe this isn't actually a very useful book. But I think that for people who are going through really hard situations, one, reading Frankl's talk about the concentration camp in actually kind of a bit of a chipper way. I mean, he recognizes it as horrifying, but it's also he has a profound sense of, I guess, optimism based on the fact that they can't take everything from you. That I think is inspiring, especially if you're in a bad situation where you can still squeeze meaning out of your life even if you don't have meaningful work or meaningful relationships. And I think Frankl demonstrates this. And so if you're particularly down on your luck, I think this book has high utility, and if you're not, like maybe an 8. And then if you're not, this book just maybe isn't too useful. For entertainment, I gave it a 4. His writing is mostly informative rather than entertaining. Although a lot of this stuff is interesting, I wouldn't call it entertaining. For interesting, I gave it a 6.5. His and the interesting and novelty rating kind of go together. Novelty also got a 6.5. It's just very unique. His perspective of thinking about what the experience of the concentration camp is doing to you psychologically and analyzing it. Other accounts about the concentration camp, like Eli Wiesel's Night, for example, focus a lot more on just the atrocities and the just hopelessness of the situation and the suffering, and that's just not quite the case with Frankl's version, because Frankl's like, you just suffering's an opportunity. I mean, it's more complex than that, but it's he talks about how individuals kind of break and how you avoid breaking is his main focus of concern, rather than just the process of being dehumanized, which is probably more common amongst other accountings. For style, I gave it a 4.5. I think that this book's very profound, but I don't think it's especially well written. So, for readability, I gave it a 6. It's not like especially difficult, which is why. But it could have been better written so that it's easier to read. I gave it a 7 for difficulty. Overall, as far as recommendations go, I think I would recommend it to anyone who's concerned with meaningfulness in their life, anyone who's in a particularly bad situation in their life, and then people who are studying psychology. Kind of in that realm of if you have significant overlap between those categories, or you're particularly deep in those categories, I would recommend this book. I wouldn't just recommend it to a general audience, I don't think, although I think it was very good. I think that it's more deserving of a higher rating than this 5.79 overall, but that's the rating it gets with all the all the categories averaged. Uh, so if you like this review, feel free to give it this a like or subscribe if you want to see more. As far as discussion goes, what do you think about finding meaning in suffering? Uh, it's an interesting type of paradigm, and I don't think you reach that sort of conclusion unless you're just adamantly refusing to accept a lack of meaning in one's life. And if all you have is suffering, then I guess you suffer well. I think is Frankl's conclusion. And so, as far as discussion goes, let me know what you think of that. I think it's Frankl can certainly be wrong, but I think his position's quite admirable from a position of just struggling and trying to live one's life well. Um, Let me know. Have a good one.